It started as just another family game night on The Tonight Show, until an 8-year-old boy reached into his pocket and changed everything. The Tonight Show studio buzzed with its usual electric energy. 300 audience members filled the iconic blue and gold set, their laughter echoing off the walls as Jimmy Fallon wrapped up his opening monologue. The Roots provided their signature musical backdrop. Questlove's drums keeping perfect rhythm with the infectious enthusiasm that made late-night television magic happen every single night. Tonight's guests were the Henderson family from Portland, Oregon, 5 generations who had won a contest to play games with Jimmy on national television. There was great-grandmother Rose, 89, sitting proudly in her wheelchair with a blanket across her lap, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Grandmother Patricia, 67, a retired librarian with gentle hands and a warm smile. Mother Sarah, 45, a high school teacher whose nervous laughter betrayed her excitement. Teenage daughter Emma, 16, trying to look cool but clearly thrilled to be there. And 8-year-old Marcus, the youngest Henderson, sitting on the edge of his chair with wide eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the studio around him. Jimmy bounded over to their designated play area, his navy suit jacket perfectly tailored, his smile as bright as the studio lights. "All right, Henderson family, are you ready to play some games?" The family erupted in cheers, Marcus jumping up and down in his seat. He was small for his age, with sandy brown hair that stuck up slightly in the back, and a gap-toothed grin that made everyone in the studio smile. He wore a blue button-down shirt that was clearly his special occasion outfit, and he clutched a small backpack in his lap like it contained precious cargo. "Now, Marcus," Jimmy said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level as he always did with younger guests, "I hear you're pretty good at games. What's your favorite?" Marcus's face lit up with an intensity that caught Jimmy off guard. "Chess," he announced proudly. "My grandpa taught me before he went to heaven." A gentle awe rippled through the audience. Jimmy's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "Your grandpa sounds like he was pretty special." "He was the best," Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "He taught me that every piece on the board has a job, and even the smallest pawn can become a queen if it works really hard." Jimmy smiled, touched by the wisdom in those young words. "That's beautiful, buddy. Your grandpa was a smart man." The planned games began smoothly. They played a hilarious round of charades that had great-grandmother Rose acting out TikTok dance to thunderous applause. They attempted Jimmy's famous box of lies with teenage Emma, who proved to be surprisingly good at fooling the host. The energy was perfect, the laughter genuine, and everyone was having exactly the kind of wholesome family fun that made great television. But during the final game, a trivia contest about family traditions, something shifted. Jimmy had just asked the question, "Name something that gets passed down through generations in families." And the Henderson family was huddled together, whispering their answer. That's when Marcus suddenly stood up from his chair and reached into his backpack. "Jimmy," he said in a voice that seemed older than his 8 years, "before we answer, I need to show you something." The studio audience quieted slightly, sensing something different in the boy's tone. Jimmy looked over at the Henderson family, who all seemed as surprised as he was by Marcus's interruption. "What's up, buddy?" Jimmy asked, walking closer to Marcus with that easy smile that had made him America's favorite late-night host. Marcus pulled something out of his backpack and held it carefully in both hands. It was a single chess piece, a white king, carved from ivory that had yellowed slightly with age. The piece was clearly old, worn smooth from decades of handling, and there was something about the way Marcus held it that made everyone in the studio lean forward slightly. "My grandpa wanted me to give this to you," Marcus said, his voice trembling just slightly. Jimmy's smile faltered for just a moment. Your grandpa wanted you to give this to me? Marcus nodded solemnly. Before he died, he wrote me a letter, and part of it was about you. The producers in the control room leaned forward in their chairs. This wasn't part of the planned segment. This wasn't scripted. But something about the gravity in that 8-year-old's voice told everyone to keep rolling. Jimmy knelt down in front of Marcus, his full attention focused on the boy. What did your grandpa say about me, Marcus? Marcus looked down at the chess piece in his hands, then back up at Jimmy. He said that sometimes, when he watched your show, you reminded him of a little boy who just wanted to play games and make people happy. He said you had a young heart, and that young hearts understand the most important things about life. The studio had grown quieter now. Even the audience seemed to sense that something profound was unfolding. He also said, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength, that he wanted to play chess with you, but he knew he wouldn't get the chance because he was getting sicker. So he wanted me to bring you this piece and ask if you would play a game with me instead. Jimmy's eyes filled with tears so suddenly it surprised him. He looked down at the chess piece Marcus was offering him, and something about it seemed familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. Marcus, Jimmy said softly, can I see that piece for a moment? Marcus carefully placed the ivory king in Jimmy's palm. The moment Jimmy's fingers closed around it, his entire expression changed. His mouth fell open slightly, and he stared at the piece like he was seeing a ghost. Marcus, Jimmy whispered, where did your grandpa get this chess piece? He found it, Marcus replied, in Washington Square Park in New York, like 30 years ago. Some kid had dropped it during a chess game and was crying because his set was broken. Grandpa helped the kid look for it, and when they found it, the kid's dad was so grateful that he let Grandpa keep it. Grandpa always said it was his lucky piece. Jimmy's hand was shaking now. The cameras caught the moment perfectly. The exact second when Jimmy Fallon realized that this wasn't just a random gift from a fan. This was something impossible, something that defied every logical explanation. Marcus, Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper, I think I know where your grandpa found this piece. The studio was completely silent now. 300 people holding their breath, waiting for Jimmy to explain. Jimmy stood up slowly, still holding the chess piece, and walked to his desk. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. When he opened it, the cameras could see it contained an antique chess set, all black pieces, clearly old and well-loved, but there was an empty space where the white king should have been. 32 years ago, Jimmy said, turning back to face Marcus and the stunned audience, I was 9 years old. My dad had saved up for months to buy me this chess set for my birthday. We were in Washington Square Park playing our first game together when I accidentally knocked the white king off the table. It rolled into some bushes and we couldn't find it anywhere. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row brought their hands to their mouths. I cried for an hour, Jimmy continued, his voice thick with emotion, not because the set was expensive, but because it was the first really meaningful gift my dad had ever given me, and I had broken it on the very first day. Jimmy walked back to Marcus, the chess piece still in his hand. A nice man helped us look for it, an older gentleman with kind eyes who spent almost an hour crawling around in those bushes with us. When we finally found it, my dad tried to give him money for helping, but he wouldn't take it. He just said, sometimes helping someone find what they've lost is all the payment you need. Marcus's eyes were wide with wonder. That was my grandpa. That was your grandpa, Jimmy confirmed, kneeling down again so he was eye level with the boy. And now, 32 years later, he's returned my piece to me. Behind the scenes, something unprecedented was happening. The producers, who usually guided every moment of the show, had stopped giving directions. The cameras were rolling, but no one was calling shots. Everyone in that studio understood They were witnessing something that transcended television. Jimmy looked at the chess piece in his hand, then at Marcus. Your grandpa didn't just want us to play chess, Marcus. He wanted to remind us both that some things come full circle, that kindness travels through time, and that the games we play connect us to people we've never met and people we'll never forget. Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding more than an 8-year-old should have to understand about loss and love and the mysterious ways the universe brings people together. So, Jimmy said, standing up and addressing his production team, can we get a chessboard out here? The audience erupted in applause as crew members scrambled to set up a small table with a chessboard between Jimmy's desk and the Henderson family's seating area. Jimmy carefully placed his antique chess set on the board, finally reuniting the White King with the rest of his pieces after 3 decades. Now, Marcus, Jimmy said as they sat down across from each other, your grandpa taught you how to play, so I'm probably going to lose this game. But something tells me that winning isn't really the point tonight. Grandpa always said the best games aren't about winning, Marcus replied, moving his first pawn forward. They're about the time you spend with people you care about. As they played, Jimmy asked Marcus about his grandfather. The boy spoke with the kind of reverence that children reserve for their greatest heroes. His grandfather had been a retired high school principal who spent his days in the local park teaching chess to any child who wanted to learn. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's 2 years ago, and as his memory began to fade, the one thing he never forgot was how to play chess. Even at the very end, Marcus said, moving his knight, when he didn't remember my name or Mom's name, he could still play chess. The doctor said it was stored in a different part of his brain. Jimmy found himself playing more slowly than usual, not because he was struggling with the game, but because he didn't want this moment to end. Every move Marcus made showed the careful training of someone who had learned from a master. But more than that, every move carried the love of a grandfather who had used chess as a way to connect with his grandson, to teach him about strategy and patience, and thinking several steps ahead. Your grandpa was teaching you more than chess, wasn't he? Jimmy observed as Marcus captured one of his pawns. Yeah, Marcus smiled. He said chess was like life. Sometimes you have to sacrifice something small to protect something important, and sometimes the moves that look scary are actually the ones that make you stronger. The game continued and something magical happened. The studio audience, which had been perfectly silent, began to engage with each move. When Marcus made a particularly clever play, they cheered. When Jimmy found himself in check, they gasped. It wasn't just a chess game anymore. It was a community experience, a shared moment of wonder and connection. Check, Marcus announced quietly, moving his queen into position. Jimmy studied the board, then looked up at Marcus with genuine admiration. You know what, buddy? I think your grandpa would be really proud of that move. He's watching, Marcus said with a kind of certainty that only children possess. I can feel him. Jimmy looked around the studio, at the Henderson family crying tears of joy, at the audience members leaning forward in their seats, at his crew members who had forgotten about cameras and lighting and were simply absorbed in this moment of pure human connection. You know what, Marcus? I think you're right. I think he's here. Jimmy made his next move, but instead of trying to get out of check, he moved his king directly into Marcus's path. Checkmate, he announced. You win. Marcus looked confused. But you could have moved your king to safety? Jimmy smiled, that genuine smile that had made him beloved by millions. Marcus, your grandpa spent his whole life teaching children. Tonight, through you, he taught me something too. Sometimes the most important thing isn't protecting yourself. Sometimes the most important thing is letting someone else succeed, letting someone else have their moment to shine. The applause that followed was unlike anything The Tonight Show had ever heard. It wasn't the polite applause of a television audience. It wasn't the excited cheering of fans. It was the kind of applause that recognizes something sacred, something that touches the deepest parts of what makes us human. And Jimmy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white card. "Marcus, this is my personal phone number. Not my manager's, not my assistant's, mine. And I want you to promise me something." "What?" Marcus asked, still clutching the chess pieces they had played with. "I want you to keep teaching other kids how to play chess the way your grandpa taught you. And whenever you teach someone new, I want you to tell them about tonight, about how a game that started 32 years ago in a park finally got finished on a television studio, and how sometimes the most important connections happen across time and space and even death." Jimmy stood up and walked to his desk one more time. He returned with the wooden box that contained his chess set. "And I want you to have this," he said, placing the box in Marcus's hands. "It belongs with someone who understands what your grandpa understood. That chess isn't just a game. It's a way of connecting hearts and minds across generations." Marcus looked down at the box, then up at Jimmy. "But this is yours. Your dad gave it to you. And now I'm giving it to you," Jimmy said, "because I think that's what my dad would have wanted, and I know it's what your grandpa would have wanted. Some gifts are meant to keep traveling, Marcus. They're meant to find their way to the people who will love them the most." It wasn't a quick television-friendly hug. It was the kind of hug a grandson gives to a grandfather, the kind of hug that says, "Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for understanding what really matters." And Jimmy hugged him back with the kind of tenderness that reminded everyone watching that, behind the comedy and the celebrity, he was just a man who understood what it meant to be loved by a father figure and what it meant to pass that love forward. When they finally separated, Marcus whispered something in Jimmy's ear that the microphones didn't pick up. Whatever he said made Jimmy's eyes fill with fresh tears, and he nodded solemnly. Later, Jimmy would reveal that Marcus had whispered, "Grandpa says thank you for finding his peace, and he says the game isn't really over, it's just beginning." The show ended that night with Jimmy sitting alone at the chessboard, making one final move. He placed the white king back in its starting position and looked directly into the camera. "Sometimes," he said, his voice soft but clear, "the most important games we play aren't about winning or losing. They're about the connections we make, the love we share, and the pieces of ourselves we leave behind for others to find tonight. A little boy reminded me that kindness travels through time, and that the best moves in life are the ones that help someone else succeed." The camera lingered on the chessboard for a moment before fading to black, but the impact of that night would resonate for years to come. Within days, chess sets began appearing in parks across America. Children who had never heard of the game were asking their grandparents to teach them. Libraries reported increased demand for chess books. Local chess clubs saw membership triple as families looked for ways to connect across generations. And every year on the anniversary of that show, Jimmy would end his monologue the same way. "Tonight, we're playing for everyone who taught us that the most important victories happen when we help others succeed." The audience would always respond with knowing applause, understanding that they were part of something bigger than television, something that proved love never really dies. It just waits for the right moment to remind us it was there all along.